What's up, creators and creatrixes? I'm Wicked. I'm giving power back to the people, and you can't stop me. Today we are going to discuss Moon Magic, but before we dive in, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up, smash that subscribe button, and click that little bell so that you can stay notified when new content appears. If you're enjoying my content and you'd like a one-on-one session, head on over to the Wicked Witch's web and check out the Wicked Coaching tab so that we can start creating your favorite experience together. With all that being said, let's dive in. Moon magic is its own subject for sure, but it's also an incredibly important element of the craft for most witches. And this is because the moon represents the goddess. Now, in the craft, it is an earth-based religion, so it's all about connecting with the universe. Now, many people don't see it as a religion, more a path of spirituality. However you choose to label it, that's up to you. But regardless, when it comes to witchcraft and Wicca, and a lot of forms of paganism, it's all about connecting with the elements. Now in the craft, we adhere to 5 main elements, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, you may notice that I use a pentacle at the end, and it demonstrates each of the elements, but it also demonstrates some correspondences, and these are the correspondences that I focus on particularly in my coaching because they all relate to a different element, which allows you to pull on all of these points of power to empower and fuel yourself through your personal journey. Now, in the normal world, we're used to there being 4 elements, but when it comes to magic, spirituality, and a lot of religions, there are actually 5. You have fire, earth, air, water, and ether. This is spirit, source, God. Once again, however you choose to label it, that is up to you. But in the craft, it is important to pull on all 5 of these elements. And as a lot of witches are so focused on the earth-based part of the craft, a big part of that connection is with the mother goddess, because it is Gaia who gave us this wonderful planet to be on. At least that's what some of us believe. Now, your beliefs are your own. This is just a little bit of insight as to why a lot of witches favor the moon so much. As it represents the Great Mother, it offers a ton of power. But there are also different phases of the moon, of course, that also demonstrate the different phases of the goddess, which would be the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Now, the maiden is when the moon is waxing, the mother is when the moon is full, and the crone is when the moon is waning away. These represent the different cycles of life as well. A lot of witches actually turn to the craft because they notice this innate connection with the moon, and others, kind of stumble upon it as they begin working with the craft. But witches are not the only ones who are completely infatuated with the moon. I think through social media we've been able to see how much people really love the moon and the sky and all of nature for sure. But the moon seems to be a really big focal point. You don't often hear people talking about, what phase the sun is in. Though this represents all of our sun sign zodiacs, it's not quite as big of a topic. People are usually assuming there's a full moon based off of how other people are acting, or they might want to know what placement the moon is in, and there's a good reason for this. Now, when it comes to moon magic, there are tons of different ways that you can utilize the power of the moon to help fuel your craft. You may want to line certain things up depending on the phase that the moon is in. Now, each phase represents a different thing, so it's important to know which one's which if you want to start aligning your magic with the moon cycles. Now, of course, we have the new moon, but what we don't talk about a lot is the dark moon, which is the first day of the new cycle when there really is no moon in the sky. This is a prime time for doing secret workings. Now, this can mean pretty much anything, so you can kind of use that to your discretion. The dark moon was also thought to be a great time to just rest, regather your energies, allow yourself to rest and recharge, and to just be. This would be kind of like charging your phone battery before you go to leave for the day, right? You want to make sure you have enough power in the bank to get you through. And so the idea of resting on the dark moon is so that you have enough energy to get you through the entire moon cycle. Because when you work with the moon, not only can you just work with one particular phase, but you can actually set your workings up to go all the way through the cycle. And after I explain each phase, we'll get into that a little bit. But after the dark moon, you have the new moon, and this is a great time for new beginnings. This is also the best time to set your intentions for the rest of the work you might be doing during the cycle. However, if you're just looking to manifest new things, this would be the time. When the moon is new, it is just kind of starting to collect itself once again and start on a new journey. That fantastic energy of new beginnings can be easily brought into your life. When the moon is waxing, this is a time of bringing things in. This is a time of growing, of fueling, of gathering. Many different ways that you can look at these cycles, but these are just kind of the basics to give you the idea, right? So when you are working with a waxing moon, you might be trying to bring in money or love or stability or healing. This is a great time to bring in those new, fresh energies to help you with whatever it is that you're working towards. When the moon is full, this is when it's going to be at its most powerful. So realistically, you can use this phase for absolutely anything. But in a lot of the texts, you will find that this is the time to cast for the heart's desires. And the reason for this is that because whatever is closest to your heart is what you're going to be putting the most energy into. So this already aligns with the moon cycle. You know, the full moon isn't the time to cast like a measly little spell that is just kind of low level for there are a lot of spells like this, and you might find yourself casting some, and if you get there or if you've already done this, then you know what I mean. But that's not really what you want to use the full moon energy for. You can, and it's going to be more powerful, but if you're looking for subtle magic, you might want to wait until either the waxing or the waning phase. The full moon is all about bringing in those great big things. It's using all of that lunar power to channel into manifesting your desires. In a lot of pop culture, usually the full moon is to blame for something. You'll see in many different types of witch shows and movies, it's always about the full moon, right? And with werewolves, you know, they only change during the full moon. There's all sorts of lore about what the full moon does. A lot of people think that it brings about lunacy, and that word actually stems from lunar, meaning moon. And the idea is that it makes people crazy, but it doesn't necessarily make them crazy so much as it just adds higher energy. It intensifies everything. So the moon isn't making you crazy, you just might already be a little bit off your rocker. And so long as you're not hurting anybody, that's all right. Live your life. But recognize that the moon isn't forcing anybody to do anything. It is amplifying certain characteristics. And it's also going to amplify certain emotions as well, because the moon is very closely related with all water elements. If you know anything about astrology, you'll know that Cancer is ruled by the moon, and Cancer is by far our most emotional zodiac. Now, if you're a Cancer and you're viewing this and you're thinking that's not true, recognize there are different placements in your chart. And so if you're somebody with a Cancer Mars, you might be more emotional than somebody with a Cancer Sun. And this is because Mars has a lot to do with emotions. It's all about where your drive comes from, and there's a lot of tapping into the shadow realm when it comes to Mars, so it can be a bit triggering. You might also notice that anybody with a Cancer Venus is going to have some really intense emotions as well. And once again, there's nothing wrong with this. Live your life so long as you're not hurting anybody else. As long as you know how to control yourself, it's okay to feel your life and your experience as deeply as you need to. Just recognize that regardless of your zodiac placements and where they're at in your chart, the moon could definitely amplify whatever you're going through. So if you're at a particularly emotional time in your life and the moon goes into its fullest phase, it's likely that all of that is going to seem really intense. However, the same can be true on the opposite end of the spectrum. If you've been feeling really detached, disconnected, drained, and the moon goes into its full phase, you might notice it kind of zapping away the rest of your power. And this isn't actually what it's doing, that's just what it's going to feel like. The moon is empowering those disconnected belief systems, so it might even lead you into more amplified disassociation. Now, there is power here to be played with, but the way you're going to channel it might be different based upon where you're at in your own life. The moon's power is also going to differ depending on what zodiac it is in, so that could play a huge role in what you notice going on with other people or with yourself when the moon is full. Because not only is it going to be amplifying your characteristics, it's going to be amplifying the characteristics of that particular zodiac as well. So once again, using Cancer as an example, if the moon is full in Cancer, you're going to notice a lot of emotions are going to be running high, because that is what it is amplifying, the emotion center of life. Now, once again, you can use the full moon for really any working that you choose, but because it is amplifying those things, you're going to want to go with what you have been putting your power into or what needs the most power. This way you can amplify those effects of your efforts. Now, when the moon is waxing, this is a great time for sending things away. So this would be when you want to practice your bindings, your banishings, your curses, your hexes, anything like that, when you want to send energy out and away from you. Now, as you guys know, I don't necessarily condone using any type of dark magic, but as always, it would be a disservice for me not to share what I know. To be completely honest with you, if I were going to curse or hex anyone, big if here because I don't have the time to spend my energy that way, but if I was going to, I would probably use the dark moon to do it. Like I said, that's the best time for doing workings that you want to be kept a secret. Anyway, the waning moon is a great time to send things out. So if you've been dealing with a lot of heavy healing, now would be the time to release the remainder of that internal trauma. This is also a great time to leave a job or a relationship or to clean your house as well, because this is going to help you stir up all of that energy and get rid of it. Workings like that, where you're wanting to get away from the old energy so that you can bring in the new of the next cycle, is the best time. This is when you want to use the waxing moon. Now, like I said, you can set this up if you have enough foresight and you like to plan things. You can set your workings up so that they work in tandem with the moon cycles. Like I said, if you're doing some healing, your intention would then be to heal. During the waxing moon, you would be wanting to bring in a lot of healing, loving, supportive energies. During the full moon, this is when you're going to want to really focus on the healed version of yourself, because that is what you're trying to manifest. So that's what you're going to want to bring in. And then when the moon is waning again, you're going to want to get rid of the rest of that trauma, whatever's lying underneath. You're going to want to face up your shadow and banish it all away. So those are just kind of the basics of how you can use the cycles and what each of them represent, but there are so many other ways that you can work with the moon. Now, for instance, a really common practice in the craft is drawing down the moon, and this is not only working with the cycles, but actively drawing the lunar energy down to you into your working so that it can be present with you. When you're drawing down the moon, this can look different for everybody. Honestly, there are tons of different ways to do it. You can write up your own little spell in order to cast to do that, but it's mostly a meditative visualization practice. You are going to want to actually see that energy coming down and empowering you or your tools or whatever it is that you're putting it into. Speaking of empowering, I think at this point, most of the world knows that you can use the moon to charge your crystals. This is because, once again, all of that powerful lunar energy has really strong effects, so it can cleanse your crystals from any old energy that they're hanging on to and then recharge so that they can go with you into the next cycle and supply you with more power. But if you want to supercharge your crystals, you're going to want to use that drawing down the moon practice and bring that energy directly into them, and then let them bathe in the moonlight. Now, if you're like me and you have more crystals than you can count, this could probably seem a little bit stressful, like you're gonna have to go out there with your 10,000 crystals and do a drawing down for all of them. No, you don't. And even if you do this with all of your crystals, you don't have to do it individually. You can do it for the collection of them. But you're going to want to focus most on the crystals that you have been using a lot and the crystals that you would like to use. So if you're planning into your next cycle, you're gonna know, okay, I'm manifesting money. I'm gonna want to charge my pyrite and my tiger's eye to make sure that it has tons of power to bring me into the next cycle. But you can also, if you know you've been using your labradorite a lot, you might want to, see, more crystals than I can count. You might want to cleanse it, charge it up, and then put it away if you don't plan on using it in the next cycle, so that way it can hold onto that energy for later use. There are a lot of fun things that you can do with the moon too. A way that you can create supplies for your craft is to use the moon's energy. A lot of people are probably familiar with the concept of moon water. Now, the best way to create moon water is to get it from a natural source. Directly from a spring is absolutely best, but of course, not everybody has access to that or time to get it, and even if you do, sometimes things just slip your mind. So it is okay to go with, bottled or tap water, but it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of a cleansing and a blessing before this. However, the moon's energy should purify a lot of what's going on there. It's just, like everything, you want to get it as high vibrational as possible so that it can be as effective as possible. In order to make moon water, you're just going to take your bottle of water and charge it in the moonlight, and voila, you have moon water. Now there are ways you can amplify this by adding small crystals and pebbles to it. It all depends on what you're going to do with it. A lot of people actually like to just straight up drink their moon water when they feel like they need an extra power kick, and this is totally okay too. I've even heard of people making enough moon water to then take into a basin and bathe in to charge themselves at a later date. This is also a great practice. It just is going to take a little bit more work. But you can use moon water for virtually anything. If you want to just have it, you can use it to make into coffee and tea, or you can use it in ritual practices. There are a lot of different types of spell jars, potions, and tinctures that are going to require a little bit of water, and moon water is going to be the best for those particular practices. This is because, once again, it's bringing in all of that really powerful lunar goddess energy that is going to help bring up the energy level of whatever it is that you're casting for. Let it be known that you can also use the moon to charge many other things. You can use it to charge your craft supplies, your favorite jewelry, your plants, especially if they're a little bit, sickly. Like I have one back there. I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera, but it's not been doing well. And using the full moon to charge your plants up can actually help turn them around. But you can also use the moon to charge yourself. Now, I have 5 pieces of really cool raw quartz clusters that I like to set out in a pentacle shape around me, and then a nice piece of, it's like curled selenite. Curled's not the word, spiraled selenite, yeah. And I like to sit within the pentacle and hold that piece of selenite and allow the moon's energy to channel down into me right before I step into whatever powerful working I'm planning for the full moon. This on top of a ritual bath beforehand and a lot of saging, cleansing. It helps get me into a really powerful energetic state, which I can then put into my workings. And I've noticed that when I take the time to go through all of that ritual, my energies are so much more effective. I think since the beginning of time, the moon has always been a thing of wonder for humankind. It's just there, and it's bold and beautiful, but it's always changing, going through different phases, and it just kind of invokes a sense of mystery within us, which is actually in the astrology as well. Now, if you know anything about Greek mythology, you might know that the moon is ruled by, or rules, Hecate. She is the goddess of the moon, of witchcraft, the night, the underworld, spirits, and dogs, animals, and serpents as well. But it's no wonder that they paired the goddess of the moon up with the goddess of witchcraft. I mean, the moon has always been a huge staple in the craft, and it's because not only are there so many powerful uses for it, but because I think a lot of witches have always and forever been doing a lot of their workings under the cloak of night, and this was when they had the goddess to protect them. This was when they were able to really, truly connect with the goddess and channel her energy for safety, for added power, for prosperity, abundance. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's actually a really fantastic book by Dolores Cannon that is called The Horns of the Goddess. Now, if you don't know, Dolores Cannon was a hypnotherapist who has since left this world, but her work began, I want to say, back in the 80s, possibly even earlier. But she was a hypnotherapist that would work with past life experiences, and she began really taking record of this when she noticed that multiple people were having the same types of experience. And she was a big pusher for the concept of we're not just, human beings, we are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience, and we will go on to have others. Now, in this book, The Horns of the Goddess, Dolores Cannon is working with a couple females on channeling their past lives, and most of them were witches, and they had different relationships with the craft. Now, this was way back in a time when women were still being killed for the practice of the craft. And so, it wasn't just women either. I think it just kind of got sensationalized as being mostly women, but men were killed for their practices with magic as well. And so, since it wasn't safe to speak about these things, when they would approach each other and they started to kind of get an inkling for this new person and they seemed to have craft-like ways, they would kind of give up, it's almost like the hanged ten, but they would give up this symbol to represent the horns of the goddess, and this would be when the moon is in its crescent form. And this was how they were able to recognize themselves and establish a safety between them so that they could go on to connect about their magical workings. That's got to be one of my favorite books. If you do check it out, trigger warning, there is some pretty harsh abuse content in there that I didn't even see it coming. It just kind of slapped me in the face. But one of the main characters has a really gruesome death in her past life, so just be forewarned. However, I really love the term Horns of the Goddess. That was what drew me to the book in the first place. I initially didn't even know that it was by Dolores Cannon, who I had heard of before but not yet gotten to check out her work, and I felt really called to that book. And then I learned that it was the one she was working on when she passed away, so her friends, family, editors, all of them kind of just took what she had and went on to put it together and try to make a really beautiful, really interesting story out of it. And I think my biggest takeaway was that they used this symbol as a way to recognize one another and show that they were safe people. It just kind of goes to show that the goddess, the moon, it's always been a huge influence in the craft, and for other types of magical workings as well. In the occult world, the moon is very revered for its undeniable power. Now, when it comes to moon magic, there are likely many facets of it that I have not mentioned here, so if you have heard of something else, don't take what I'm saying as contradictory. There are so many different ways to work with the moon, and if this inspired you to come up with your own ways to interact with this lunar energy, by all means follow that calling, because as always, your own inner being, your own inner source is going to have the absolute best path to your alignment, which is how, where, why, all of the, big questions of what you should be doing. And as long as you follow your intuition when it comes to these things, you're not going to go wrong. The craft is all about trusting the inner self, getting to know the inner self, discovering what the inner self already knows, and bringing it into this life with us. I think for now that's all I have for this one. I feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you guys, and if you're totally new to this is going to be a lot more for you to digest than you were probably bargaining on, but I reserve the right to make yet another Moon Magic video if I decide it's time to share the rest of it. With all that being said, thank you so much for joining me, and make sure to like and subscribe so that I can help you keep your third eye in the sky. Stay blessed.